Mrs. Miller here. I'm reading another story from Stories for Little Folks. This time I decided I needed to wear my Merry Christmas sweater with Santa Claus on it because the name of this story is Sandy Elf and Santa Claus. Hope you enjoy it. Sandy Elf was curled up in front of his fireplace. He watched the bright flames leap and dance over the burning logs. How snug and warm he felt. Outside, the fleecy snowflakes were making a white coverlet over the frozen ground. Rap-a-tap-tap, rap-a-tap-tap. What can that noise be? Murmured Sandy Elf lazily. He raised his head on his elbow and then listened. There it was again. Rap-a-tap-tap. Sandy Elf jumped up. He ran and opened his door. There stood another elf. This elf was dressed in a brown fur suit, but on his head was a perky orange-colored tam-o'-shanter that matched his mittens and shoes. He smiled and handed Sandy a letter. In another second, he was gone. Here's Sandy, laying by the fireplace when he heard rap-a-tap-tap. Sandy Elf took the letter over to the fireplace to read. "Oh," exclaimed Sandy out loud, "it's from Santa Claus." Quickly, he tore open the seal, drew out the letter, and read, "Dear Sandy, will you please come to the North Pole and help me in my workshop? It's almost Christmas time, and I still have to make so many orders to fill, especially for sleds. And of course, we all know that no one can make sleds like you, Sandy. I shall be looking for you, your true friend, Santa Claus." Sandy Elf was delighted. He'd like nothing better than to make sleds for boys and girls. He raced to his clothes closet and took down his white fursuit, jaunty red tam-o'-shanter, red mittens, and red shoes. He would need those at the North Pole, for it was very cold there. Sandy dressed quickly, and then, because he was a very careful little elf, he locked his windows and put out his fire. He darted for the door and then stopped. He had forgotten his magic cloak, so he unlocked his pinecone box and shook out his downy cloak. This magic cloak was Sandy Elf's proudest possession. With it wrapped around him, he needed only to say where he wanted to go, and the magic cloak picked him up, sailed him quick as a wink through the air, and set him down at his destination. Sandy Elf locked his door and gently drew his magic cloak around him. Zingo! Away he sailed through the swirling snowflakes. Straight for the North Pole he went. It was no time at all until Sandy Elf reached Santa Claus's big white home at the North Pole. All about Santa's big white home were his workshops. Hundreds of elves worked in his shops making toys for boys and girls. The little elves loved to make these toys, and they laughed and sang as they worked. Here's Santa's home. Sandy Elf was glad to be back again. What fun he would have making sleds! He rapped on Santa's big door. The door opened, and there stood jolly Santa Claus himself. "Why, hello there!" cried Santa Claus in a cheery voice. He stooped and swept Sandy into his arms. "How did you get here so soon?" he asked. "I didn't expect you for some time yet." "My magic cloak brought me here," answered Sandy Elf proudly. "Oh, of course! How stupid of me to forget your magic cloak! And now that you are here," added Santa, "I'll take you to the shop where the sleds are being made." "Oh, yes, do!" exclaimed Sandy. "I want to start right away." So Santa Claus took Sandy Elf to the sled workshop. Rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. How the hammers flew. Some of the elves were fixing the runners on the sleds, some were adjusting the steering bars, and still others were painting the finished sleds. When they saw Santa Claus walk into the shop with Sandy Elf in curve of his plump arm, the elves all stopped to shout, "Hello, Sandy!" They all loved Sandy and were glad he was back to help them. Sandy knew how to make sleds too. He made them so they would go swifter and farther than all the other sleds. Sandy Elf started to work with a will. Here's Santa bringing Sandy to the workshop. He bent the runners of his sled just so. He got down on his knees, squinted his bright eyes to see if the runners of his sled were perfect. Sometimes he would hammer a little on one side and then on the other side. Then he would smile and say, "I know this sled will give some boy or girl a long, long ride down a steep hill." The days sped by. It was the day before Christmas. The sleds were piled high in the storeroom. Sandy Elf was busy painting his last sled. He was painting it a bright red. Sandy Elf liked the bright red color because it made him think of jolly Santa Claus's suit. He just finished painting it when Santa Claus walked into the shop. Santa's face was all wreathed in smiles. "Splendid work," said Santa Claus. "All of the toy shops are finishing their work just in time." "How the children will like these fine sleds," added Santa, as he walked through the shop, patting and praising each elf in turn. "Tonight," said Santa Claus, "I'm giving a party for all my loyal helpers. We shall play until it's time to pack my sleigh for my trip around the world." "Hooray! Hooray!" shouted the happy elves as they danced up and down. That evening, all of the little elves skipped up to Santa's house, all dressed in their very best fur suits. Santa Claus had a big Christmas tree. The tree glistened and sparkled in the candlelight. There were packages of every size and shape all over the tree and heaped under it, too. There were tool chests, skates, wristwatches, and new fur suits. Santa Claus read off the names on the packages and handed each elf his gift. At last, jolly Santa Claus called, "Sandy Elf!" He handed Sandy a bright red package. Sandy Elf couldn't imagine what was in his package. He shook it, he felt the weight of it, and even pressed his wee nose against it, but he couldn't tell what it was. Finally, he decided that the best way to find out what was in the package was to open it. So he did. There in the tissue paper was a tiny silver flashlight. Sandy was delighted. He flashed it around the room to see how much light it made. After the gifts were given out, the little elves danced and played games. Finally, Santa Claus said it was time to pack his sleigh. The elves stopped dancing and started to work. The sleigh was almost packed with toys of every kind when Santa said, "I've forgotten the ring for little Princess. It's still at Smithy Elf's, the jeweler. Sandy, would you get it for me?" "I'll be glad to," cried Sandy Elf. "It's several miles to Smithy Elf's home," said Santa, "but with your magic cloak, Sandy, you'll be back before we're finished packing." Sandy Elf drew his silvery magic cloak about him. Zingo! He was gone. In no time, he was at Smithy Elf's home. "I have come for the ring for Princess," said Sandy Elf. "I was just wondering if Santa Claus would forget it," answered Smithy Elf. "Santa Claus never forgets," laughed Sandy. He slipped the tiny package containing the ring into his pocket. Here they are at Smithy Elf's, gathering the ring for Princess. "I must go now," he said, "for Santa Claus was almost through packing when I left." Out of the doors once more, Sandy Elf drew his magic cloak about him. Away he sailed. Now North Wind thought he would play a joke on Sandy Elf. "I'll just take his cloak away from him," said North Wind. So North Wind blew and roared with all his might, turning and twisting poor Sandy around in the air. North Wind was unwrapping the precious magic cloak that clung to the elf. Sandy Elf tried so hard to hold it tight, but it was no use. North Wind blew harder and harder until away went the magic cloak. Down, down came Sandy Elf and landed head first in a snowdrift. "Oh my!" sputtered Sandy Elf as he scrambled out of the snow, pressing his hand against his pocket to see if the ring was safe. "Whatever shall I do? My magic cloak is gone, and Santa Claus will have to leave before I can get the princess's ring to him." Poor Sandy Elf trudged along in the snow. He tried to hurry, but it was hard work. He didn't have time to look for his beloved magic cloak. North Wind had probably blown it far away. Sandy Elf slipped his hands into his pockets. He felt his little silver flashlight that Santa had given him, so he took it out of his pocket and flashed it about as he walked. Presently he saw something silvery blowing out from a sharp ice-covered rock. Sandy flashed his light once more. Sure enough, it was his downy magic coat. It had caught on the sharp rock where North Wind had blown it. Sandy Elf was so happy that he fairly skipped over the snow to the rock. He took his magic cloak from the sharp, icy rock. He wrapped it tight about him. Zingo! He was off. Santa Claus was all settled in his sleigh. He was drawing his heavy fur robe up over his knees and talking softly to his prancing reindeer. They were anxious to start on their long trip around the world. Suddenly, Sandy Elf landed right on his plump tummy. Here you are at last, exclaimed Santa as he slipped the wee package into his pack. I knew you would get here in time. Sandy Elf hopped out of the sleigh as Santa raised his whip and called to his reindeer. Away they went. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, called Santa as he sailed out of sight. How nice that Sandy Elf saved Christmas. Well, I hope you enjoyed that Christmas edition of one of these stories. There's only one more left, and I'll read it to you next time. Have a good day.